What makes food safe?
So, if we go down to the basic science, food has three kind of hazards, you could say. So, it started with sending food to space. So, that is the origin of HACCP,
Okay.
where it was important that the food that went with the astronauts was safe.
Got it.
So, it started there, where what you do is you put every source of potential contamination, and then you do a risk evaluation.
And we've seen typically at retailers or kirana stores where there's a good chance of contamination happening. So how is that controlled? People finding worms in chocolates.
If you look at ways of eliminating hazards, heat is the most common one.
Okay.
And chocolate does not go through a high heat process. There is potential. FSSAI does provide a guideline for sampling and auditing. Food safety officers can visit you. So regulation provides for them to come in if they think they anticipate an issue.
Curious to know how food stays safe before it reaches you? Tune in to our podcast to hear our expert Ramesh Agrawal from Food Safety Works, who's going to talk about food safety. From risks to regulation, it's a must listen for anyone in the food industry. Hey guys, this is Vikas from Acquis. We're here with another podcast. Today we have with us Ramesh Agrawal. Ramesh is an expert in food and food safety, and he's going to talk about what are the various things happening in the food industry. So Ramesh, welcome to the podcast, and great to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ramesh, will be great for us to know a little bit about you, and also your company. If you could tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what Food Safety Works does.
Sure. So a little bit about me. Although I run Food Safety Works, I'm not a food technologist myself. I graduated in computers, did a degree in business, and then sort of got into this, I could say, by serendipity. When I quit my job, and this was something that was happening, things were growing. FSSAI had just come into the market, I would say, in 2011. The regulations were published. The first draft regulations were published. And that is when India became aware of food safety. Of course, we had been in this business earlier than that, but that was mostly for regulatory compliance for international stuff. So more management system consulting for brands that were exporting out of India or were supplying into multinational brands. So that was my entry. So since 2014, I started working on it initially more part-time, trying to understand this. And now I've been with Food Safety Works, you could say, for about 10 years, now that it is 2024. So 10 years. And in 10 years, I think we've really, we've been in business for about 15 years, out of which 10 years has been more around FSSAI. So we've grown our business. We now do complete food safety regulatory compliance solutions, which means all the way from conceptualizing a product. So we also do product development, conceptualizing the product, making sure that it meets the current regulations, product standards, process standards, licensing, registration, for import, for export, advisory services, factory layout and design. So food safety is a vast space, and there is a role to play in everything. So a lot of audits are there, a lot of trainings we do. So everything put together, finally aiming at making sure that the food that reaches your plate is safe and compliant. So that's really a gist of all the things that we do.
Okay, great. So, how do you define safe food? What makes food safe?
So if we go down to the basic science, food has three kind of hazards, you could say. So there is the physical hazard, the chemical hazard, and the microbial hazard. So as long as your food is free from these three hazards, it is considered
So let me
safe.
repeat that: microbial, chemical,
And physical.
and physical. Okay.
So these are the three types of hazards. And if your food is free of any of these, it's considered safe.
Okay.
It may not really be about nutrition. A lot of time people mix it up, saying, is it healthy?
Okay.
There is an angle of health to it. If you eat contaminated food, you could fall sick, could result in deaths.
Okay.
It's a very risk-prone product.
Right.
Food is highly risky. So in that sense, it does deal with health, but it is not really about nutrition. So your product may be completely safe. It may not be nutritious,
Makes
but
sense.
that's a different story we can
Understood. It
discuss.
may not be. It may have a lot of oil, trans fat, etc.
Exactly,
But yeah, okay.
exactly. It may be
Understood.
perfectly safe,
Understood.
but yeah, it may not be the healthiest product that you eat.
Got it. Okay. So, what kind of food do you generally work with? Is it mostly packaged food, or you also work with produce that comes from the farm as well?
So we start, I think, at post harvest,
Okay.
which basically means after you harvested the food, put it in a storage. So
Okay.
we kind of start from there. And from there onwards to processing. So it could be primary processing, like converting paddy into rice.
Okay.
It could be then converting rice into beaten rice.
Okay.
And then from beaten rice into poha that you
Okay.
eat.
Okay.
You could freeze dry that poha and make it into a packaged product. And you could be selling it to retail. And it could then come to your house and you will put water back into it, reconstitute, and eat it. So we have a role to play in every part, storage, processing, and hazards could be introduced at any of these steps. If you don't store it properly, you could end up with contaminating your paddy or your rice, or when you process it into poha, you
Right.
could end up contaminating the product,
Okay.
or when you're cooking, manufacturing. So every node in the supply chain is a potential to contaminate the product.
Yes.
And the regulations or the systems and processes have to ensure that it doesn't happen.
So what you do is you help companies who are conscious of ensuring that their food is safe. You help
Yes.
them build the right processes and systems
Exactly.
so that they are free from those three methods that you mentioned, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So putting control systems in place, checking on all of the things that can contribute. So there is the basic principle called HACCP, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points.
Okay.
It started with sending food to space. So that is the origin of HACCP,
Okay.
where it was important that the food that went with the astronauts was safe.
Got it.
So it started there, where what you do is you put every source of potential contamination, and then you do a risk evaluation saying,
Okay.
what is the likelihood of this happening? And
Okay.
if it is happening, then what is your control on it? How do you eliminate that hazard?
Okay.
Or how do you control the hazard? So it goes through a systematic process of evaluation, and either you can control the hazard from entering into the process, or you will have to find a way to remove that hazard if you suspect that there is contamination in it, and then putting a control, so putting a monitoring system, so that you are verifying that this is happening or this is not happening, or making sure that food finally that gets out of your gate is safe.
Understood. I'll come back to some of the systems later. But help me understand, journey of food, I mean, goes through, various, especially in the supply chain, Indian context, right? Goes to various processes. One, it also goes to various nodes in the supply chain. You have a factory, you have maybe a SD, warehouse, retailer. And we've seen typically at retailers or kirana stores where there's a good chance of contamination happening. So how is that controlled?
So if we go by the regulation, everybody in the supply chain is expected to follow a certain set of systems and processes.
Okay.
So if you look at a retail kirana store, they may or may not be following the process, unfortunately.
Okay.
So there are requirements of segregation. You make sure that the product is not getting mixed up with other things, right? So food is kept separately. There are storage guidelines. There is cleaning and sanitization guidelines. Okay. So you make sure that you're cleaning your premises properly. Then there is pest management guidelines, making sure that there are no pests there. There are storage guidelines. If a product requires it to be stored in a certain condition, then you have to maintain that. It could be cold chain, it could be normal temperature. So it requires that the retailer also follow each one of the steps. And in the absence of that is where you would hear some of these incidents. Yeah,
So I mean, we've heard a lot of cases about chocolates. People finding worms in chocolates. Do you think that's
Correct.
mostly happens at the last mile or the retailer end, or do you think that could also be happening earlier, much earlier in the chain?
So the chocolate case is very unique.
Okay.
Most incidents likely happen at the last mile.
Okay.
But there was one particular case, I think, which is the most popular one, which happened because. So what can happen is there are eggs
Okay.
which can get into the product, and there is no good way to destroy it. And
Understood.
chocolate particularly. So if you look at ways of eliminating hazards, heat is the most common one.
Okay.
And chocolate does not go through a high heat process.
Okay.
So there is potential. Of course, there are now processes which will help you eliminate that in other ways. But at that point of time, it was probably an egg or a larvae which developed inside the packet, and it was actually coming from the factory.
Okay.
But I think that's different now.
Okay.
All the processes have been fixed, and that does not happen anymore.
Interesting. Okay. So, in terms of processes, these are just processes that company needs to follow, or there are, bodies which also audit these companies to make sure these are getting followed.
Okay. So the regulator kind of puts together a set of guidelines saying they are high-level guidelines.
Okay.
Saying you have to, let's take an example of FSSAI. It says that you must have a HACCP-based food safety management systems. That is
for the manufacturer.
That is for the manufacturer, or even for a distributor.
Okay.
So they say that. Now, what does that mean is something that the manufacturers themselves have to specify.
Okay.
Because each product is different, each process is different.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to do the due diligence and come up with the process. And they are expected to validate the process, saying, this is my process and it works.
Okay.
And then follow the process. So if we were to follow that whole cycle, then it should mostly work. It is a self-enforcement. It's a preventive system.
Understood.
It is not a corrective system. It's not post-factor, it's pre-factor.
Okay.
So you just follow the system, and hopefully it's a controlled system. So like any other system design, you expect that the system is a controlled system. You have a box in which the processes are defined. You define what goes in, and that way you will always know what comes out, right?
Understood.
So if the input is fixed, the process is fixed, the output should be fixed.
Okay.
So that's really the whole principle that expects the government expects you to do.
Understood. But there's no audits or anything like that would happen.
So there is a requirement. So the regulations again say that they have an auditing requirement, saying every food, what they call as a designated officer, or every area should sample so many things.
Okay.
So FSSAI does provide a guideline for sampling and auditing. Food safety officers can visit you. So regulation provides for them to come in if they think they anticipate an issue as a preventive measure. They can come in, inspect your factory, collect samples from you, send them to the lab. If they find discrepancy, you will be asked to provide clarification on that, satisfactory clarification. There are penal fines if you don't comply. So all of that is there.
Understood. Okay. And does it also cover ingredients? When I say ingredients, for example, let's say you took an example of poha.
Mm-hmm.
Does the regulation also decide or describe what kind of pesticide could be used on, or insecticide could be used on the rice itself? Or is that part of the regulation?
So what the regulation says is what are the pesticides that are not permitted to be there.
Okay.
So so in the product definition, they will tell you that these are the things you need to test for.
Okay.
That list is derived from the agricultural practices.
Understood.
So we typically know that if it is rice, then these are the pesticides that are used. And there is a residual limit that is specified for each of them.
Okay.
And your product should have residual limits that are lower than what the regulation specifies.
And that testing would happen at what stage?
That testing is expected to, unfortunately, commodities are not covered.
Okay.
So if you go to APMC yard, buy rice, it will not happen.
Understood.
But as soon as you start packaging it,
Okay.
so if you package rice as it is, the expectation is that rice that comes to your from then onwards
Okay.
should meet that requirement.
Okay.
Do we test it? That is debatable.
Okay.
Should you test it? Yes.
Okay.
And if we start there, then everything that gets built onward. So if your rice is pesticide free, and your so then your poha will automatically end up being pesticide free, because that's the major.
Correct.
So whatever else you are adding, right? So if your vegetables are pesticide free that you are adding, your oil is pesticide free, which goes back to if your oil seeds were pesticide free. So if all the ingredients were pesticide free, then in the supply chain, it'll kind of.
But all of this is self-enforced, right? I mean, nobody is actually.
No, FSSAI does pick up samples.
Okay.
So they can pick up samples from the market. Okay. They do once in a while.
Okay.
If there are complaints, they do. And like I said, they have the usual requirement of sample pickup as well. So that's also in the regulation, saying they have to pick up so many samples per month, per year, etc. So they do that. There are approved laboratories. Most states have an NABL accredited laboratory that is run by FSSAI, or they will have an empaneled lab where they send all these products for testing. Okay. And if found not meeting the parameters, then it goes through the process of. Okay.
So two questions about FSSAI. One, is that the only body which regulates food, and what is covered by FSSAI? What can they regulate?
Okay. So in India, FSSAI is the only body that regulates food. Okay. And it was created precisely for this reason. Because earlier there were different bodies, like oil was regulated separately and milk was regulated separately, and commodities were regulated separately, and there was PFA. So there was a lot of confusion about who was controlling what. So FSSAI was created to put all of that, all food under one umbrella. And what is covered? Every aspect of food. So basically, right from packaging. So as soon as you start processing, like I said, post-harvest, as soon as it converts its form, okay, from then on, FSSAI can regulate the product, okay, including storage and transport.
So whatever goes in a pack, is that a requirement? Does it have to go in a pack or a bottle?
So if it is sold loose, that is agricultural commodity, right? That is outside. Okay. But as soon as it gets packaged, okay, it is now under FSSAI. Okay. Okay. So it could be so like I said, not just manufacturing, but even transport. So a transporter who's transporting food is expected to have a license for transporting food. Okay. A warehouse which is storing food, it needs to have an FSSAI license for storing the food. Okay. And of course, a retailer needs to have, a manufacturer needs to have. Okay. Everybody needs.
So even your kirana store needs to have
an FSSAI license. Okay. Yes.
I think most of us probably don't even know that or aware of that.
Yeah. So the other thing is, it should also display the license visible to the customer. Okay. So it should be in a place which should be visible to the customer.
Interesting. Okay. And our health supplements, like your vitamin D's or vitamins or multivitamins and maybe other health supplements and Ayurveda products, are they also part of this?
So Ayurveda is not. Okay. Ayurvedic is covered under the Ayush license, which is a different mechanism. Okay. But FSSAI now has Nutraceutical as a category. Okay. So if it's a nutraceutical product, over-the-counter vitamin supplements, could also be herbs, could be other products. So they have a list of approved things that you could sell as nutraceuticals. Okay. And as long as it is within that, it falls under the nutraceutical category, which comes under FSSAI. Okay.
So food, so whatever you consume is either food, a nutraceutical, or an Ayurvedic supplement. Anything else which we probably
medicines are the other ones which comes under the pharma comes outside. Okay. But the other two.
But typical things like pudina probably fall under Ayurvedic.
They fall under Ayurvedic.
Okay. Okay.
or the manufacturer has to choose where they want to pick it up. It's more likely to fall under the Ayurveda than on nutraceutical.
So anybody who started to, let's say, set up a factory to make food or anything, for example, let's say somebody just picking up seeds, mixing it and selling it as a product, do they need to get a FSSAI license?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It could be, let's say, I don't know if you're hinting at some of the products which like seeds they mix, right? So which is a trail mix or something.
Yes, trail mix which is sold in your plastic packs and we don't even know who the manufacturer is sometimes.
Correct. Yeah, so trail mixes need to have. So
correct.
If it is, so any product, even if it's a pure single ingredient product like we call it, the labeling requirements are relaxed for single ingredient. So like if you pack rice, then you don't have to put nutritional information because it is not giving you any additional value.
Understood.
But if you are mixing even two things, then you need to declare that. Saying, so you need to have a license for sure. And then you need to declare.
Is it just a registration or the license as well?
So it depends on your model. So there are various things. So a registration is if you have a turnover less than 12 lakhs per year, that is when you qualify for registration.
Understood.
If you've crossed 12 lakhs, you are a state license. If you are under certain categories, like if you're doing nutraceutical, you have to get a central license.
Understood.
You cannot do it under state. Similarly for e-commerce, if you're doing e-commerce, you're selling it on e-commerce, then you have to do a central license. If you exceed a certain turnover, you have to get a central license.
But these are all FSSAI licenses?
These are all FSSAI. FSSAI is 3 types. So registration, a state license, and a central license. Based on your nature of business, or they call it as KOB, kind of business, you could fall under any of these. Or sometimes based on categories as well. So you could fall under any of these. Based on the volume of your transaction, you could fall under any of these.
So you said labeling requirement differs if it's a single ingredient versus a mixed ingredient. So anything, if you mix more than 2 ingredients, so like say if I mix salt, if I add salt as well to something, does it qualify as a double ingredient?
Yes. It's not a single ingredient product. So you have to declare that you have to have an ingredient list in which you say that you have X and comma salt. And you'll have to put a nutrition table which declares how much salt is there. And then now your product needs to have a declaration saying, so much fat, so much carbs, so much protein, so much kilocalories, what is your serving size, RDA, all of that needs to be specified.
Interesting. And how much of FSS, let's say we have other bodies as well across the world. I don't know if you worked with them. You have a US FDA, etc., right? How much of the regulation changes between countries?
At a high level, they tend to stay same. There is this overarching body called Codex Alimentarius. And they try to, and their objective is to harmonize standards across the globe. FSSAI is also a signatory to that. And they try to harmonize the standard, but sometimes they are different. And that is primarily driven by country-specific logic. There could be, maybe our agricultural practices are not sophisticated enough. So we can put, so we might want to put an MRL level which is higher. Because we cannot really produce something at a certain MRL level.
So that maybe for our audience, you can define what MRL is.
MRL is a residue limit, basically. Minimum residue limit, which can be permitted. ETO was one such case. And then, so there are different other standards as well. What is permissible, something may be considered carcinogenic in certain countries, may not be on a banned list in India. So there are ingredients that may be in banned list in different countries. And it's a country specific regulation. So they can choose to do whatever. Sometimes it could be a trade barrier also. People may just want to put a barrier. So they put just stringent regulations. Other people can't meet. So like any other regulation, it is, it does vary from one to
the other. So when
a
country defines a particular food item or a ingredient to be carcinogenic, I mean, and while it's still sold here, I mean, is it a cause of concern?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be. It depends specifically on the study that was done. All of that is usually based on the study. So the countries hopefully are doing study and maintaining it. And these are long-term studies. Now, you could argue that what works for a Caucasian male, Western Caucasian male, may not hold for an Indian gene. So you could make arguments like that.
Okay.
But in general, I think if you were to err on the side of defense,
Okay.
then you should probably avoid it.
Understood. Okay.
Right? Or at least some study needs to be done to prove that it is safe. And these are at such micro levels and such long-term studies that it is difficult to pinpoint.
So any reason why FSSAI itself is not taking those steps? I mean, let's say a particular food item was found to be carcinogenic or was banned for some reason. So why is that? FSSAI takes time to act on it.
Correct. So I think one of the ways to look at it is that it's a new body, right? So we said that 2011 it came in. 2014 is when it started enforcing, and for about 3 years they just went around telling people that, hey, you have to get a license.
Okay.
So until about 2014. So it's really been 10 years in the enforcement. So that is one. The other is also, I think, I don't know, but I'm sure there are budgetary constraints. Studies like this require a lot of money over a long period of time.
Makes sense.
So then you have to do control sets and data sets. So even if you were to start the study today, I don't think we'll get a result for another 10 years or 15 years because these are very, very long-term studies. So we are new in this space. I'm sure things will evolve and we will do our own studies. Things that are already proven to be, I think it'll do a lot of good if we can enforce things that are already banned.
Makes sense.
Rather than go looking for newer things to ban. Because it is such a kind of, a spread out market with micro and medium and small businesses. And, so there's just too many small places to enforce. So that's really...
So restaurants are also under FSSAI, right? I mean, they need to have...
Sorry?
Restaurants.
Restaurants are also under FSSAI. So they have a different category of license, but they fall under FSSAI.
So, I mean, you mentioned FSSAI is a new body, but there are some initiatives which they have taken, which is, ensuring that things like Eat Right, I think you're aware of that, and probably there's been a lot of discussion in social media about eating the right kind of food, avoiding things like palm oil, etc. Getting some of the brands to own up to what they talk about on the label, right? So what are other things which FSSAI has done, and how it has shaped the industry?
So Eat Right is an awarded initiative. I think of integrating everything around food. So there is safety, hygiene, there is nutrition. There is also some amount of sustainability. So under the Eat Right India, you could do Eat Right Campus, you could do a Eat Right School, there is a Bhog program which looks at temples getting certified. So any place where there is food service, you have some kind of a program. So I think it's been about creating awareness. So that is slowly coming in. You can see the difference in the last 4-5 years, how they're, and hotels also, restaurants also. There is an HRA, hygiene rating audit. And these are, although very, very voluntary kind of certifications. So you can go get yourself audited, but it's not mandatory yet. So that way, I think it is giving time for people to understand and adjust. So I think Eat Right is a good initiative. It will take its time. Now, coming on to getting labels to own or manufacturers to own for what they write on the label, my opinion sitting in the industry is that I don't think they write wrong things on the label. I think the label does mention things clearly. I think we as consumers don't read labels enough, nor do we understand enough.
Makes sense.
So it is kind of technical. So FSSAI says you have to write RDA. Now, how many of us understand RDA, right?
Agreed.
RDA is a daily allowance is permitted. So you can look at your label and say, how much of my salt comes from this.
Understood.
Right? If I'm allowed a certain X amount of salt, my packet of chips is already giving me 16% of that salt. Should I be eating it?
Okay.
Probably not. But I think we are not sort of knowledgeable enough. Our education system is not doing anything to educate people either, because they are sort of doing a blame game, saying all processed food is bad. So that is the other problem. Language is the other problem. A lot of it tends to be in English. If you look at regional purchasing, then that is another problem. To simplify all of this, FSSAI did try to bring in the front of the pack labeling, what they call as FOPL, is there in other Western countries. About Europe has it, UK has it, Brazil has it, Israel has it. So lots of countries have that to simplify this information. And they've made 3 attempts at doing it, but they've not been succeeded. There have been draft regulations, but never been operationalized. And the biggest push, I think, is from the industry.
Sounds like,
we are unusually high consumers of salt, sugar. So the front of the pack labeling is basically all the 4 things: salt, sugar, and fat. So these are the 3 main culprits. And we consume a lot of it.
Makes sense.
If you look at all of the Indian snacks, so we keep blaming, saying pizza burger is bad, but our bhujia mixture is no good. You look at the amount of salt that is there in our bhujia mixture is atrocious. Our Indian sweets, so you cannot say anything about them. And fat, we love fried food. So a large part of our industry thrives on these 3 parameters, and they don't want to look bad.
Makes sense.
So then they've been fighting tooth and nail to jeopardize this regulation, and they've succeeded so far. So for 3 times, 3 draft regulations have lapsed.
Interesting.
I'm still hopeful it will come someday or the other. At least it does a signaling, asking manufacturers, saying, hey, this is something you have to care about. And you see some of the manufacturers already tuning their products to reduce some of these. So in that sense, I'm hopeful that things will improve on the food side. And then when people are close enough, they will agree to implement this.
I think some of the work which is happening on social media also helps. We've seen a couple of people particularly talk about, the contents of the food, how much of salt content it has or sugar content it has. So I think that's also creating awareness.
It is.
And I think it's helping out.
It is. I think finally what will help is what I say is money speaks. If you as a consumer are aware,
makes sense,
and you don't buy it, that's the easiest way to solve the problem. As long as you keep consuming, people will keep selling it to you. You stop consuming, people will not sell it to you.
Makes sense.
Right? It's a business. Nobody is sitting around making loss, trying to spoil your health. That is not their agenda. Their agenda is to make money. And if you're buying it, they will keep giving it to you.
And because the agenda is to make money, I think also to reduce costs, right?
Correct.
So is the use of palm oil is only because of that? I mean, because I can probably do it at a lower cost, and knowingly that palm oil is probably not healthy.
So there is nothing extraordinarily unhealthy about palm oil either. It's a fat, like any other source. There is a certain amount of sustainability aspect to it. Because before palm oil, there is a lot of forest destruction that happens. As in, it's grown in tropical areas, clearing up tropical forests.
Makes sense.
But that is true for all plantation crops. You will see that with rubber. You will see that with palm oil. You see that with cacao.
Makes sense.
You see that with other plantation crops as well, with coffee. Now, governments are putting in regulations, like European Union is putting the EUDR to control some of this. So that is one negative aspect of it. But apart from that, it's like any other fat. So, and if you are able to mass produce it, it becomes cheaper.
Understood.
That's the reason why it is there. The other is also, I think, the neutrality of flavor. If you're making a product, you don't want the ingredient to interfere. Like if you were to use mustard oil, right? Comes with fantastic amount of smell. Yes. Not everybody likes it. True. You use peanut oil, comes with smell or flavor of peanut. Sunflower oil comes with it. So I think palm oil is quite flat. And it just makes it easy, saying whatever flavor you can add to it and it'll just be neutral. So I think there are multiple reasons why people use.
But then why do brands change the oil? Well, we've seen cases where they use palm oil here versus some of the oil is used in other countries.
It could potentially be for, I could say, posturing. There is a little bit of kind of marketing around it. I'm sure, right? We market in India as well.
Sustainability,
it could be, sustainability is one. Even localization is other one. As in, I'm sure we've also in India started saying that contains no palm oil.
Correct.
Is now a marketing plot, right? So yeah, understood. I think that could be the reason.
So let's come to some of the technical aspects of food now. There's ISO standards, right? So when it comes to food, what are the various standards that are available, which a company can try and attend, so that they can then and of course talk about themselves being true to some of the standards.
Sure. So one is the country's regulatory. So every country will have its own regulatory standard. That is FSSAI, US FDA, European Union, UK, Canada, New Zealand. So they have their own standard. So that's a mandatory requirement that everybody needs to meet. Apart from that, you could go through a certification process for the process. So there are process standards. So ISO is a management system standard. So like you have ISO 9001, which is any process you could convert into ISO 9001. Very specific to food is ISO 22000. So it is a management system for food companies. So where HACCP is included, all your hazard management is included. So everything is included in ISO 22000. So that is the basic one. Now, ISO 22000 is not a GFSI compliant standard, as they call it. So there's the Global Food Safety Initiative. So if you want to, there are some other additional requirements. Once you pack ISO 22000 and those additional requirements, you end up with FSSAI 22000, which is a GFSI compliant standard. So companies can look at implementing system and processes as per FSSAI 22000 to build that standard or get themselves certified for that. BRCGS is another one, which started in UK. So the B starts for British. So that's where it started. It used to be, if you were exporting into UK, that was the standard you needed to comply with. It is also a GFSI compliant standard. It predates FSSAI. So before FSSAI came in, BRCGS was the GFSI compliant standard. So these are the three big ones. Then there is IFS. You can also get SQF certifications. But these three tend to be the most popular. Both the buyers look for it, as well as the implementers implement.
So this is, when you say buyers, mostly will be B2B buyers, right?
They are all B2B buyers. Yeah. So the B2C really does not get to know, except they know that the company is certified for ISO 22000. So they know it's given to a company, not to the product.
Not to the product.
Not to the product. So the company can be certified.
Understood. So you mentioned about EUDR, right? Which is a very important regulation, because now we need to ensure, talking about sustainability, climate change, etc. So how much of EUDR would impact the food industry? I think there's only 7 commodities which are now brought into the Act, Do you think it's probably going to extend to other commodities or other food items?
So I don't see the number of commodities getting added.
Okay.
Primarily because, like I said, it's mostly about plantation crops.
Okay.
And I think we are fairly covered on that. So initially it will be just that. What is exporting out of India is commodities. So we also sell, all our coffee does not go as coffee powder or anything. We sell coffee beans. So in that sense, it will affect all those products. But as we start doing more and more, we start exporting more and more processed food, let's say, the complexity will start increasing.
Okay.
So an example I can give is, if you're exporting coffee bean, it is a very simple process. You know where the coffee bean was grown. You will do a geo mapping and you will share that with the buyer, saying this coffee came from here. That's an easier problem to solve. If you were to start exporting spray dried coffee powder, then it becomes a little more complicated. Because there is potentially 6 farms from which you got coffee, you ground and mix them, and if you convert it into a spray dried powder, that needs to get a certificate of backward traceability. You take this and make it into a cold coffee product, you mix it with cold coffee, then that makes it even further complicated. So it will get complicated as we start making more complex products or start exporting more complex products. Because the backward traceability, so you have more links in the supply chain,
right?
It becomes more complex. If you're just selling commodity, you're just one hop away from the farm.
Makes sense. Okay. So when you say traceability, now, do you believe traceability is important only to certify with UDR, or do you believe traceability in general will help the food industry because consumers are now looking to understand where the food is coming from?
Sure. So traceability has always been important. It is part of the requirement of every regulation if you go back. FSSAI also tells you that you have to have a recall plan. So if you have a recall plan, you have to have traceability. You have to have forward traceability. You have to have backward traceability. Same with US FDA. So every regulation wants you to do traceability. And it is a must do. Is it visible to the customer is the second part. And to a company, it should be visible and it must be visible, right? So tomorrow you get a complaint on a certain batch of product. You should be able to go and figure out where it came from, do a root cause on it, identify those ingredients. If that ingredient was actually used in another product, go check for that product. If that has the same problem, issue a recall. Is that product? After doing a root cause, if you find that the contamination is hazardous and could cause health problems, then issue a recall on the forward side saying all the material you need to know which distributor it went to, which retail store it went to, how much is sold, sitting on the shelf, bring it back. All of that is the regulatory requirement.
Even FSSAI.
Even for FSSAI. There aren't too many recalls that gets issued.
I don't have heard of a single recall.
No, there hasn't been any. There hasn't been any. There was one that came from about some herb, which got exported. So that was flagged by the European Union.
Only because it was exported.
Because it was exported, it got flagged. We issued a recall, figured out it was wrong flagging also. So it didn't help too much. So that is one part. The second, what you're talking about is the traceability to the consumer. Saying, should the consumer be able to see this? It is an interesting idea. And I'm sure it is interesting to see that. But implementing that is expensive. And the question is the customer willing to pay for it? Because finally, nothing comes for free. The customer must be willing to pay for it. There are very few today. So if you go look at label scan reports saying how many people actually scan the label or the QR, it's not very high. People who read the label. So we conduct an annual label awareness survey. Over the last 3 years, we've seen increase in the number of people looking at the label. But even then, a majority of them don't look at anything. There's most of them just look at the manufacturing date. So I'm saying it will take a while before at least the Indian consumers.
Understood.
I don't have insights into the American consumer or the European consumer, but Indian consumer is still not there
Okay.
where they will actually trace it,
Interesting.
or the number of people who will trace it are very, very few.
But you're saying at least until it's sold to the consumer, there has to be traceability even required by the regulations, right?
Yes, required by the
Okay.
regulation.
But then, do you think how many companies would have actually implemented that?
At least the ones that implement some of these standards,
Okay.
they do,
Okay.
because that is a key thing. So as part of doing an internal audit that we do,
Okay.
there is a mock recall. So
Okay.
mock recall has to be conducted.
Okay.
So which means, and there are timeline requirements saying you have to finish your recall within 3 hours or 4 hours.
Okay.
You have to declare what is your time for mock recall,
Interesting. Okay.
for your recall, right? So I will be able to finish my recall in 1 day or 2 days or 30 minutes or 4 hours.
Okay.
So that's something that you have to document, saying this is how much time I will take for my recall, right?
Interesting.
Like all processes, there has to be a standard,
Okay.
and for which there are mock recalls issued,
Okay.
where you can go back and trace every product
Okay.
forward and backward. So if you've implemented the standard correctly,
Okay.
then it is there.
Understood.
We can ensure that.
Okay. But I assume it probably would be not more than single digit numbers.
It's
Terms of-
yeah.
Okay.
We can talk about standards.
Okay.
Not everybody with a certificate has actually implemented the standard in its true spirit. I don't want to say that they have not implemented the standards, but implementing it in the spirit is important. There are customers who will who implement it. We have some of them, and we are proud that they take so much care of it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, you as part of food safety, your company as well, Food Safety Works, you also educate or train people, or you also help them create standards. So, what is the kind of trainings or work you do? Do you help startups as well to understand the regulation, etc.?
Right. So we do a lot of training. So we'll start with the mandatory one. Now FSSAI has this program called FOSTAC,
Okay.
which is a mandatory training for all food businesses.
Okay.
You do realize that there is not everybody working in the food factory needs to be a food technologist.
Okay.
So there has to be an awareness among every one of them. So FSSAI has created the FOSTAC program where every food business must have one certified food safety supervisor for every 25 food handlers.
Okay.
So that's a mandatory requirement. So we do those trainings.
Okay.
Apart from that, we have our catalog of trainings. So we do trainings around management systems, again, around ISO, FSSC, BRCGS. We have trainings that talk about lab testing, sampling, methodology, NABL accreditation.
Okay.
We have courses that talk about implementing, let's say, environmental monitoring systems or preservatives, safety about preservatives, about HACCP itself, food safety culture, implementing food safety culture, or how do you develop a culture of food safety? How do you measure them? Competency management. We have a lot of trainings around regulatory. So around what is a licensing regulation? What is an organic regulation? How do you get yourself organic certified?
Okay.
Or what is your alcoholic beverages? What is whiskey? When can you call it a whiskey?
Okay.
So
So interesting. Even Alcobev,
Alcobev has a regulation
but again, it comes under FSSAI.
under FSSAI.
Interesting. Okay.
So it will define what's a whiskey, how much level of percentage of alcohol it must have, what it can contain, what it cannot contain.
Okay.
That leads to some limitation in innovation of late, low alcohol beverages. They don't know where to fit them.
Okay.
So things like that happen, but there are things like that. So we do trainings around that. Pretty much nutraceutical regulation. What is a nutraceutical? What kind of licensing you will need for nutraceutical? And they are open to startups. We work with a lot of incubators.
Okay.
Where we do this awareness sessions in partnership with the incubators.
Understood.
To make them aware about what is required of the licensing. A lot of people do not understand. We see umpteen cases where they do have a license, but their kind of business is not matching.
Okay.
The products that they have put on the license is not matching with what they are manufacturing. They are manufacturing things that they are still operating under registration when they really should not be operating under registration. So things like that are quite rampant. I think primarily because the awareness, it's a very, very technical topic. Whether it is, let's say, which category does it fall under? So a lot of people are not aware, and they tend to outsource sometimes to the cheapest guy in town who does not understand the technical details either. So they do get them a license. But is it the right one? It's very often that you'll find a wrong one. So that's really the issue. But yeah, we do trainings around all of these topics, trying to increase awareness.
So, in terms of your company or in business in general, food business of food, and how has it changed in the last 10 years? Especially because now there's e-commerce, there's a lot of companies which have gone into health supplements or talking about healthy food, healthy snacking, a lot of that.
Yeah.
So what are the things you've seen that has changed, and what are the top 2 things in your mind which has actually changed the industry or will change the industry?
So I think one thing that has definitely changed the industry is the what they call as food tech. We don't call it food tech because we are the true food tech. That is delivery tech or logistic tech, as you may call it. But I think that has changed the industry quite a bit. And we think that the Indian processing industry will never really be the way the American or the European industry is, because convenience was the key for the packaged food industry. Now, with the last mile delivery problem solved, fresh food can be delivered to your house. So I think that has been a dramatic change. So that's where you will see people prioritize fresh food over packaged food. So that is one thing. The other is, of course, the health and the wellness, that awareness that has sort of increased the number of products, number of SKUs getting into the market. So the way we see it evolve is we will see more wellness products and more mixing of functional food coming in. So my natural trend is if I can get the same dose of vitamin C in a cookie, why would I want to take a vitamin C pill, right?
It makes sense.
So with the nutraceutical, things like this will become doable, right? So they are under food. Of course, you will have to get your cookie in the nutraceutical category. So your delivery format will change. Because but you can mix stuff. You should see a lot of functional foods come in. I think a lot of traditional foods will start coming in as well. The original health, I don't know if I can call it original, but the traditional health and wellness products will start coming in. So that's the other thing that we see. And the third itself is that we should see a lot more processed food getting exported from India.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like I said, we are just exporting commodities. If you look at our food basket, what are we exporting? We're exporting rice, basmati rice. We are exporting coffee. We are exporting meat as it is, right? Buffalo meat. So these are some of our largest category for exports. But with promotions of processed food by the ministry also, because there is value add, right? So basmati rice is 100 rupee, I would say, kilo rice. If you convert it into ready-to-eat pilaf, as the West likes to call it, freeze-dried product, it's a completely different product, right? So a serving of a freeze-dried product would easily fetch you 100 or 120, 130 rupees. So converting it into more finished goods. So we should see a lot more of that. And overall, I think the food industry is evolving. from being a very, very trade-oriented business
Okay.
to being more brand conscious.
Okay.
The newer generation that's getting into the food industry
Yeah.
is interested in building a brand. They're not interested in just making money. They want to export finished products.
Right.
We've seen some successes. We'll see more of those.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of startups as well. I mean,
Correct.
which are now exporting, or rather, even a lot of Indian consumers are also warming up to the idea of buying nutrition in a sachet, right?
Correct.
Mixing it with water and consuming it.
Correct.
And that's also getting exported. So that's something which is good coming out of.
Yeah.
So talking about nutrition and supplements, right? I mean, protein supplements is a big industry here in India. A lot of people now having warmed up to bodybuilding or other kind of supplements as well, right? So how's that industry evolved? And plus we also see a lot of issues in this industry. One is counterfeiting. A lot of people import the supplements and then probably rebrand it and sell it. So there are issues of toxicity in terms of what is found in some of these supplements. Then also we see counterfeiting happening, a lot of counterfeiting happening in this industry, right? So one, as a consumer, how do I safeguard myself? Secondly, what are your observations on this industry?
So I think it is almost mushroomed like a, I don't know, Griha Udyog, if you may call it. The number of protein powder mix that people are making and selling without even understanding it.
True.
I think it is unfortunate, but there is a lot of people doing it. Do they? Yeah, I think so. From the consumer point of view, I think awareness is the only thing, right? Understanding. So there is counterfeiting. It could be multiple ways. So there is an X brand, and you get the X, a fake X brand, right?
True.
So it could be X prime.
Yeah.
That is one kind of counterfeiting, which is blatant, just changing the label, putting rubbish inside it, and selling it.
Yeah, putting starch inside, I think.
Exactly. So you could put anything in it. So that's the old school adulteration, as we call it, saying you had pepper, which you adulterated with papaya seeds. So that's what we used to do. So that's plain, blunt adulteration. Now, you cannot prevent it. When anything that is expensive will find counterfeits. We know fashion world is full of that. You get Louis Vuitton bags and counterfeit Louis Vuitton bags, which are as good as Louis Vuitton. So that is unavoidable. It is so the buyers have to make sure that they're buying from an authentic supply chain. So from a store that they can trust that it is an actual good product, right? It's not X prime and it is X. That is one. Now within the brands itself, again, it would be to look at what they sell. If they see anything untoward which looks off, then they should put in a complaint. There is an FSSAI Connect app through which you can raise a complaint against a product. So you can take the bill, the product, and raise an issue.
So as a consumer, I can.
As a consumer, you can raise a complaint with FSSAI saying this is a product. And sometimes media just creates that frenzy in which the government. So the government's intent is not to encourage wrong thing, but there are so many things they need to do. So sometimes things kind of go out of focus. So then when there is noise, it comes back into focus. They do a bunch of things. But net, I think if the consumers have their eyes on the product, that's the only way of enforcement, right? There are so many. If each one is looking out for fakeness, then we can find it. And we cannot outsource that to some third-party agency. Like we say, when you're driving on the road, you cannot rely on the traffic police only.
Yes.
Because the traffic police can only do so much. We all have to be on the lookout and do self-enforcement. Also do check and balance. If somebody is breaking the law, then kind of telling them that you shouldn't be breaking the law. It's a very similar case. So being aware, being alert, lodging a complaint if you see something wrong. If you want to go to the whole 9 yards, you can actually take it and send it for testing.
Achha.
You can take any product,
Mm.
you can send it to an NABL accredited lab. A typical nutrition profile will cost you about 8 to 10,000 rupees. It does cost you that much. That's the cost of testing. But yes, you can get it tested. You can see whether the nutritional information matches.
Mm-hmm.
Ingredient, you may still not be able to figure out, but your nutrition part will get verified.
Interesting. Okay. But then again, people, like you said, I mean, that initiative has to come from...
That initiative has to come from people. So the more people are looking out for problems, the easier it is to find the problem.
Now, I think even we've seen some brands also in cases where we work with some of the brands.
Mm-hmm.
One, they also want to empower the consumers to be able to understand what they're buying, because cases like, your ingredients, like simple things like a hing, which is a very common ingredient in most Indian households, right? Which gets counterfeited a lot. How do you ensure that a consumer can verify that, they're buying a genuine product? Which is what we have seen some of these brands take up these initiatives as well.
Yes.
Let's also educate the consumer. So we, like you rightly said, consumers need to be made aware and educated, and they also need to take that initiative. We've also seen brands also taking that initiative, telling the consumer, hey, that, I'm giving you this mechanism to be able to verify.
Absolutely. Yeah. As in, all the genuine brands would want the customer to be able to verify it.
True.
So I think it is in their benefit. It is in their benefit. Because finally, the genuine ones are the ones who will get the benefit out of it.
So revenues are, obviously going to be made.
Correct.
Yeah. And also brands don't lose on the image, because if I consume a fake product thinking it's a genuine one, and then obviously if the quality doesn't match what I anticipated to, then it affects the loyalty.
It affects the whole category. Right? So I got a fake protein powder which didn't have protein in it. And I had that and I said all protein powders are fake.
Correct.
Right? It doesn't work, right? So it harms them.
Makes sense.
So if there are genuine companies, they will want you to verify, and they do put in a lot of effort, like letting you verify the traceability we talked about, the QR technology you would talk about, and some of the technology that you built, which helps, which prevents counterfeiting, all of that. So I think, and some of this becomes affordable as soon as you're talking of an expensive product, right?
Makes sense,
which is where most of the counterfeiting anyway happens. If it is a cheap product, nobody wants to replicate a 2 rupee product, right? How much can you save by replicating a 2 rupee product? You have to have a certain value to be able to replicate it.
So talking about technology, and we covered a few of the aspects. What other technology have you seen, being used right now in the food industry? Of course, there is discussion about AI, but I'm not sure AI may be relevant in terms of maybe improving the processes, or ensuring that within the manufacturing itself, we're able to remove out harmful products or harmful substances. But besides that, where else do you see technology being useful?
So I will not talk about AI. Yeah. So to me, AI is a solution looking for problems. So that is my opinion of AI. I'm sure there are problems in the food industry we will solve with AI. But coming more on the ground, which are easily... So I think technology is very underused in India in the food business. Primarily because most of the food industry tends to be micro, small, medium enterprises.
Understood.
Like any other industry, but food even more. We don't have very large conglomerates. Cost of technology adoption is higher for smaller businesses, so they kind of stay away. But as they start scaling and becoming bigger and bigger, technology will play a key role. Now, if I were to look at from my perspective of things, which is food safety, then the sensor-based technology or the IoT-based technology, I think is probably going to be quite a thing, right? Now you can monitor your processes remotely. If something is not working right, then you will get that. So
that during the manufacturing
during the manufacturing itself. Then we talked about traceability per se. As we go, it will become more and more traceable. As every So the problem with traceability is every link in the supply chain now has to adopt that technology.
Yes.
As more blocks start adopting the technology, let's say my retailers is billing on an electronic system. That is technology. He has inventory now, so he can instantly tell you where it came from, right? And that integrates with the supplier. Then the supplier can say where my stock is. So the larger companies already know in which retailer where it is. So that will build the traceability. Then it will start going backward. So forward, the sales wise, I think it is sort of built up. On the backward side, it will build up. So that will be traceability will be another thing. There's a lot of data I think is not still harvested. There are control systems. There are systems which do day-to-day monitoring and control of factory. There's a system called SCADA which controls all of the machinery. It's a generally machinery control. If we could get the data out from there and put it into a system and try to look at it, could be an AI problem to solve. So a large set of data, I don't think we've looked at that. So and sort of detecting mean time between failures, predicting failures, when does it happen, what does it happen, correlating large data sets. So today we have data sitting, like we know that
silos.
Yeah, so there is, from whatever little I understand, I'm not a master on SCADA systems, but that is there where you say that, okay, A happened, B happened, C happened. So all the events are getting logged, all the triggers are getting logged, but I'm not so sure if that is being used to kind of build a predictive model out of it. So that is one. Simulations are the other one, where you can sort of simulate products. So like formulations went through, when technology first came in, the pharma product development life cycle shortened. So that because there were certain combinations that you could just iterate on the algorithm and eliminate about 40% of your trials. That made it faster. I'm sure it will come to food as well. As we consolidate data saying which are, there is data to some extent available, right? Sweet and sour and what are the palate and each ingredient provides what kind of taste, sensory taste. To say that, okay, I will reject these two combinations, maybe new innovative food that will come in. Lots of applications of technology that you can think of all through supply. So in supply chain, like temperature monitor controls now, you can log data, whether in supply chain, if your cold chain was violated anywhere. And that's a common thing now, as in most cold chain trucks today will have a temperature logging system.
And so, you rightly said, a lot of things are happening in the logistic end. Also, I think in the farming end as well, we are seeing precision farming, drone-based uses of pesticides. So I think both ends we are seeing a good change. And while I think in the processing units as well, and there is technology that is being leveraged.
So some of that, which is not very visible, is like farmers using technology. So it may not even be that extreme, but sort of there are apps which will tell you when to sow, when to plant, or how much pesticide to sow, how much pesticide to spray, when, what, etc. So these are very, very simple things, but it will help, let's say, in pesticide residue. So there is the good agricultural practices that you must follow, right? Most of the problems happen because of overdosing, time control. So the residues reduce. So if you spray and harvest immediately, you shouldn't be doing that. The farmer doesn't know very well. So if you do a app on it, then he knows, okay, I sowed it today. This is my first pesticide. This is my second pesticide. And then after that, I have to wait for a month to harvest. And now I am in the harvest time. So if we do all of these things together, then it, of course, helps food safety. It helps farmers. So all of these technologies, I think, will slowly come together right through the supply chain, right from end to end.
Cool. So there are a lot of new companies springing up, and we've seen good startups also come out in this industry, right? So as somebody who's starting new, what are the things that they need to do? What's the advice you would give them? both in terms of business in this industry and in terms of the food safety aspects?
Cool. So in terms of the business, I think there is a lot of growth and a lot of space. I think it's a great time to be in the industry, trying out new products. There are consumers who are willing to pay, maybe a small niche, but still willing to pay for good products, clean products. So I think that is important. In terms of food safety, the advice would be to not ignore this aspect. I think it's fairly technical, and it generally gets a very low priority with startup, but it could get you into trouble. One is from the regulator. The other is it could get you into trouble for other things, saying you might have to go through if you realize it too late, you might have to do a complete product overhaul, reformulation of your product. If you're not testing it right, you could lose it on your shelves. You may say that, okay, it's a 3-month shelf life product. If you've not done your testing right, you are in trouble. You will throw a lot of products. So I think it's important to prioritize food safety and compliance. Seek out help is what I say.
I think you are the right person to.
So it not just as a business pitch, as in if you come to us, great, but seek out help. There is a lot of content that is now available. So we ourselves have a YouTube channel where we put small bits and pieces of information. We run something called a food safety conversation where we talk to food entrepreneurs. How do people join
the conversation?
Right. So we host this. We did it continuously for a long time. Now we host it once in a quarter. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You will get notifications when we schedule one where we talk to entrepreneurs. We talk to regulators. We talk to standards bodies on various aspects, on various businesses, categories. All of that is available for you to go back and replay and understand from what they are talking about. So that is there. We run other initiatives, like if you are part of an incubator, and if you can ask your incubator to reach out to us. We do engage with academia as well, to the extent of we can actually offer a full credit course to colleges who are willing to include this in their subject. The education has one course which is on food safety. That's what we have seen. And in 40 hours, they barely cover what is FSSAI. So we've put together a more detailed course.
So this would be for what stream?
So typically for people who are either, they could be F&B, so the hotel and restaurant side of it, or food science and nutrition. People who are doing food science, nutrition. Microbiology, technology, engineering. So there's multiple degrees.
Is there something happening around food engineering now?
So there are courses on food engineering. Yes. So different universities give different degrees. So there is food science and nutrition. There is food science and technology. There is food lot then there's a lot of people in the biotechnology who get into food. So yeah, a lot of colleges now offer degrees in food in various formats. So yeah, so great place to learn. So I think we also intend to start a special course only for new entrepreneurs. Let's see when we get.
I think that's going to be pretty important now because
so sort of do like an intact, maybe 2-day or a 5-day program for entrepreneurs who want to get into the food business, to understand the various aspects of what the food categories mean, or what is the product, or how should they position the product.
Even smaller things, simple things like labeling, right? I mean, what kind of labels saying to use, etc. I mean, I think because food is, an easy industry to get into. Like, we see a lot of, especially women entrepreneurs. I mean, the first thing they'll probably think of if they were to start a business would be into food, right? And I think there is a lot of learning around it, and not just about making something, packing it and selling it. And there's a lot of things which an entrepreneur needs to be aware of, right?
Yes. people perceive that to be an easy industry,
but it's difficult.
It is not. We get a lot of. So we also do new product development and recipes and formulations for some of the startups, some established companies who want to extend their brand line and product line. So people who've already been in the business don't ask those questions, but people who are in the startup would ask us a question saying, why is it so expensive?
Okay.
And the reason is because if you want to do it scientifically and systematically, it takes time and skill and a lot of verification and validation, tweaking. So it is like any other product. It's a completely new product, and every product is different. If you mix carrot juice with milk, will be very different from a carrot juice with mango pulp.
Okay.
Every combination is unique and creates its unique set of problems.
Makes sense.
And you cannot predict any of this. So once you put the product, you get the balance right, you run through the process, then you check whether it's shelf stable or not. Every bit matters.
I mean, there's a lot of science behind it, which we're not aware. Like,
there is a lot of science.
Yeah, when I said it's easy to get into, but I think it's very difficult to grow into, right?
Correct.
Like in pharma, I'm sure there's things about which ingredient mixes with which ingredient. Exactly. If it doesn't do well, I think it's the same about food as well.
It's the same about food. Okay. And it is vast. True. It is vast. So no one person could easily understand it.
True. Agreed. And maybe one last question before we wind up is in terms of education. We've seen. Do you see a change where people are now getting into the industry where they want to actually be able to pursue a career in this industry and by getting degrees in food, etc.?
So there is more people getting into it for sure.
Okay.
So 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago, when we wanted to hire people, it was very difficult. We could count the number of colleges that offered degrees in this stream. Our resource pool was very small. Now it is much vaster.
So you're seeing research also happening, good amount of research?
Like any other industry, I think research will come in late.
Okay.
So typical example, because I come from the tech world, is that when I got into the technology space in 1996, what we did was pretty much simple stuff and basic stuff. And it took us at least 9-10 years to be able to think about doing things on our own, and then another probably 8-9-10 years to create something on our own, products on our own. And we still have so few products, which are completely grounds up, based out of India, right? And we are considered world leaders in technology. So product development and R&D is a long drawn process, and it takes a lot of skill building, and it'll take time. But we've seen some very interesting
on the lab grown meat.
So there is companies around lab grown meat in India. Lab grown meat is one. Then there is plant based protein companies. So they are there. A lot of interesting on the biotech field. Some of the ingredients, we've seen some interesting companies which are doing core R&D, trying to bring out completely new products, vitamin concentrates, you could call them. So basically delivering better bang for the buck, or bang for the quantity, as we call it, right? Because the nutrition is all about how much you can pack it in. More nutrient, dense nutrients. In that space, extracts, biotech folks bringing in a lot of new sort of functional ingredients. So a lot of research is happening around that, and that will grow. We have a very long and rich tradition of plant-based knowledge in our Ayurveda. So I'm sure some of that will percolate down into converting them into more modern delivery formats, as we call it, right? So it was there. We don't understand it enough, but more and more ingredients will show up in the market.
Makes sense. No, that's very interesting. I think In Hindi we say roti, kapda, and makan, right? I think roti, food is such an important part of our life, right? Everywhere you go, I mean, food, you cannot survive without food, so it has to be important, right?
Right.
So much to do around. I think in also your, food tech is not just about surviving; it's also now about being healthy as well. People adopting newer food items, newer ingredients to do that. So there's so much to talk about food. I think even space tech kind of dictates how food grows and what kind of research happens in this industry, right? So I think there's so much to talk. I think this probably 1 hour was not enough, but I think it was great talking to you, Ramesh, and great learning from you as well. I'm sure our audience would have learned a lot and probably would have enjoyed this conversation. So again, thank you so much for being here. We'll definitely also add some of the links that Ramesh mentioned, some of his courses, etc., so that you can have a look at that. Thank you again for tuning in, and Ramesh, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. I'm happy to talk about food forever, and it can take forever. I think the whole civilizations have been created on food, so I'm sure there's lots to talk about. But thank you so much. It was a really nice and interesting conversation.
Great, sure. Thanks, Ramesh. So do tune into our podcast. We have more such very interesting guests coming up, like Ramesh, and you will probably get to learn a lot more. So do subscribe to our channel so you get notified whenever we have a new podcast. Thank you.